I was 68 years old before I ever cleaned that coin properly, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't sentiment. It was a Tuesday, and I was moving out of the only house I'd ever lived in, and the coin was in the way. My name is Elena Kovalik, and for most of my life I ran the register at my father's hardware store on Route 9, and after that, I kept his house the way he kept it, which is to say, stubbornly and without much money. The house was going to a young couple with 2 children and a dog, and I was going to a smaller place near my daughter, and in between those two facts was 40 years of drawers I hadn't opened since my mother died. The coin lived in the 3rd drawer down, under the good scissors, and a rubber-banded stack of ration books nobody in the family had needed since the war. It was heavier than a coin that size should be, dark as a nail gone to rust, with a worn shape stamped into it that might have been a crown or might have been a bird with its wings up, depending on the light and how much you wanted it to be one or the other. My grandmother kept it. My mother kept it after her. Neither of them ever explained it beyond a shrug and the same tired joke, passed down like the coin itself. That's the one that's supposed to bring the lights. Nobody in my family believed in the lights, understand. It was a saying, not a faith. Old-timers around here used to claim that every so often, nobody could agree how often, 60 years, 80, a lifetime, something moved across the sky, out past the ridge on a clear night, slow and deliberate, like it was pacing something out. The story always ended the same flat way, and if you ever see the coin shine, get everybody inside, because that means they're finally coming for us. Nobody had ever seen the coin shine. Nobody, as far as I knew, had ever tried to make it. I don't know what made me run water over it that morning, instead of just wrapping it in newspaper with the rest. Maybe it was that the house was already half boxes, and I wanted one clean thing to hold before I left it. I turned on the tap the way my grandmother used to, cold first, then warm, and rubbed my thumb across the stamped shape the way she used to, in slow circles, like you'd calm a nervous animal. The tarnish came away easier than I expected, in dark threads down the drain, and under it, the metal wasn't the gray-black I'd known my whole life. It was a deep, quiet gold, and it was warm under my thumb, in a way that had nothing to do with the tap water at all. I remember standing very still at the sink, the water still running, thinking, that's not possible, and thinking it calmly, the way you think a thing you already half suspect. Outside, the dogs started up first, not barking at anything, just that low, uneasy sound dogs make when the air itself has changed. I turned off the tap and the house was suddenly very quiet, and then I heard my neighbor Frank's screen door bang, and his voice out in the yard saying something short and sharp that wasn't quite a curse. I went out still holding the coin, still dripping, and I looked up along with everyone else on our little dead-end road, and there they were. They didn't come in fire. That's the first thing I need people to understand, because everyone always pictured it that way. The old joke always pictured it that way. Streaks and smoke and running for the cellar. What came instead was silence. 6 shapes, then more behind them, easing down out of a clear evening sky, the way a heron eases onto still water. No sound at all except a low pressure in the ears, like the moment before a storm breaks and doesn't. They were vast up close and precise as machinery, plated in a metal that didn't shine so much as remember light, dust already settling onto their shoulders, like they'd been standing in weather far longer than the minute it took them to land in Frank's cut hayfield. Frank had his shotgun. I want that on the record too, because I understood it. 60 years of a story that ends get everybody inside, will put a gun in a reasonable man's hands. But the shapes didn't move on him, didn't move on any of us. They stood, and they waited, the way you wait at a door you're not sure will be answered. I was the one holding the coin. I understood, standing there in my housecoat with dish soap still on my hands, that this had always been about who was holding the coin, and that it had never once, in 3 generations of women rubbing tarnish off it at that same sink, occurred to any of us to ask what it was for. The nearest one knelt. Not fell, not malfunctioned, knelt, one vast knee sinking into the hay with a deliberateness that made the whole field seem to hold its breath. Up close, I could see the plating wasn't blank at all. It carried lines like the coin's own worn crown or bird, older versions of the same mark, layered generation over generation, the way tree rings layer a trunk. Its head, if that's the word for it, lowered, until it was nearly level with mine, an old woman in a wet housecoat standing in her dead father's yard. "Keeper's line," it said, and the voice came from everywhere in the field at once, low and even, not unkind. "Rise, king." I laughed. God help me. I laughed, standing there, because it was such an absurd thing to be called. An old widow woman who'd spent her whole working life making change at a cash register. I said, I think out loud, that I wasn't anybody's king, and the machine didn't correct me, and didn't repeat itself. It only waited, patient as stone, the way it must have waited through 60 years of quiet nights, and dark coins, and nobody home to answer. Frank told me later, that word doesn't mean what I thought it meant, not to them. It isn't a title handed down by sex, or by court custom, the way it is in our storybooks. It's older than that, and plainer. It means the one the line comes back to. Whoever they are, whenever they're born. My grandmother could have been called it. My mother could have been called it. It only ever needed someone to finally clean the coin. Frank asked me, a few days on, once his shotgun was back over the mantel where it belonged, why none of them had ever just come down and knocked. Why circle a ridge for 60 years, and never once try the door. The kneeling one answered him before I could, in that same even voice, and said that a house doesn't force its way back into a home it was asked to leave. It only ever waits to be invited, however long that takes, however many hands pass a coin along without knowing what they're holding. I thought about that a long while. I thought about how patient a thing has to be to wait out 3 whole generations of women who never once turned the water on warm. I found out over the slow, strange weeks that followed what they actually were. These things we'd feared for 3 generations without knowing why. Not conquerors, not even soldiers in the end, though I understood by then that they could have been. They were what was left of a household, is the closest word I have for it, that had fled somewhere very far away, a long time before my grandmother's grandmother was born, scattering what mattered most across worlds it could reach, trusting each piece to ordinary hands who'd never know what they carried. The coin was never a weapon, and never a warning. It was an address. And the shapes in the sky weren't an attack at all. They were the last of a house, circling patiently for longer than anyone alive could remember, waiting only to be let back in. I sold that little house near my daughter, before I ever moved into it. I didn't need it anymore. And anyway, I couldn't have explained to the young couple with the dog why the field out past the ridge sometimes hums on a clear night now, low and content, like something finally at rest, instead of something waiting to strike. I still have the coin. I still clean it the old way, cold water first, then warm, my thumb tracing the crown that was never a bird at all. Some nights, I stand at that same sink in the house I never did leave, and I think about 60 years of women in my family, passing down a joke they thought was only a joke, never once turning on the tap. I think about how long a thing can wait, patient and unthreatening, for someone to simply do the ordinary work of cleaning what they'd been given. And I think, without any particular fear left in it, that I understand now what it means to be the one a whole exiled house was built to come home to. They call me king. I never once asked them to stop.